The new month is upon us, which means it's time to get our journal set up so that we can be cool, calm and collective entering the new month, or at least as cool, calm and collected as we can be. One of the things that I'm finding really helpful in my journal at the moment is using stickers, and I'm venturing slowly into the realm of making my own. Not so much really decorative kind of stickers, but more so just functional labels like headers and stuff like that. But I'm still too chicken to use my Cricut properly, so I do have to cut all of these out by hand. This time around though, I printed my headers on washi paper, which sounds silly because washi literally means paper in Japanese, so I printed it on paper, but this is really super thin, makes it very easy to cut out just with a craft knife if I'm applying a small amount of pressure, and although it doesn't blend seamlessly into the page, it still does a fairly decent job. Because that washi is a little bit transparent, it means that I can still kind of see the dot grid beneath it, but I'm going to be using these for all of the headers that I'm doing in this setup. The first layout I'm setting up though is my reflections page. I've really been enjoying having these at the start of each month, even though it's the last thing I fill in, mainly because I like to put it right next to my actions list, which is the space that I use to write down all of the things that I want to do to work on my goals. By having the two pages next to each other just makes it a little bit easier to fill in those reflections as the month progresses, so as I come back and check in with my actions, write down the stuff that I've been doing to work on my goals, I can then add it to my wins section in the reflection space. Now, one of the reasons that I did decide to type out and print out all of my headers this time around was because in not only the last setup we had for July, but also the one before it, I had multiple comments saying, "Why did you write wine down on your reflections page?" It was actually wins, or effectively little achievements or milestones that I'm reaching when I'm working on my goals. I just thought it was kind of funny that I got so many people saying the exact same thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is my handwriting that bad? Well, this time, no need to worry about it because I didn't handwrite these. If it looks like wine, it's all of the font's fault. It doesn't really bother me that much, I'm just being silly. But in terms of the spaces that I like to include on my reflection page, we of course have wins, so those achievements that I'm hitting. We have a space for memories, so anything memorable that happens in the month, maybe I went out with friends, maybe something exciting happened, those get recorded there. I also like to write down challenges, but I don't like to include such a big space for these. I find that I do definitely have a negativity bias, and I find it very easy to think about not so great things compared to the more beneficial or exciting things. So by limiting the amount of space that I can write in those challenges, it means that I can't dwell on the negative quite as much. Underneath this, I also have a space for lessons, so anything that I learned about myself and how I like to work on my goals, I want to write those down so I can apply those learnings moving forward. And the last two sections at the bottom are for needs and things to try. These ones are specifically related to my journal, so thinking about in the month coming up after this one, what kind of things would be useful to have in my journal, what can I try in my journal to achieve whatever it is I'm wanting to. In terms of the decoration in this setup though, we're actually going with a theme that I kind of told myself I was never going to do, and that is a coffee theme. This one was very much in particular inspired by a PET tape from the washi tape shop. I love their PET tapes, one because the designs are always gorgeous, and two because with them being printed on a transparent material, they blend really nicely with the journal pages. This means that you can stick it down directly into the journal or on top of other pieces of paper, and you don't end up with that white border that you'd normally get if this was printed on a washi sticker. I've been finding that over the months of this year, I've been slowly moving away from more doodle heavy themes, more into ones that rely on washi tapes, PET tapes, stickers, in part because that style of decoration is just more enjoyable for me at the moment. It's more exciting, I'm having fun with it, and also because it just takes less time. It probably comes as literally zero surprise, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so when it comes to doing doodle heavy themes, they do end up taking a fair bit longer for me because I end up going through multiple iterations of drawing the same thing, like draw it out with pencil, don't like how it looks, erase it, try again, repeat. For the layout we're setting up here though, typically I would call this my actions list page because that's all it would really hold, but I've started including a projects list on here as well, so instead I've decided to rename it to a working on page. While the actions list is essentially just a task list of things that I want to do to work on goals, the projects list holds, funnily enough, projects. specifically the ones that I'm going to be working on in the month, hoping to complete. Some of them may not get completed, but I just want a place to write them all down so I keep in mind how much I have going on when it comes to potentially taking on new projects. I am definitely a serial project starter and also a serial project non-finisher, which means my list of half-done projects ends up being quite long, and I'd like to focus a little bit more on completing them. Having a space to list out those projects and check them off when they're completed then is something that's going to be valuable. Before we get into the next layout of the setup, we're just having a flip back to look at how this month was going. For July, we went with a steampunk theme, relying on stickers for the decoration. Again, because if I tried to draw steampunk elements, they would take me such a long time. But one of my biggest accomplishments from this month is actually using my monthly log. The monthly log and I have an interesting relationship. I set it up time and time again and find it very difficult to use, so having it actually used in the month of July was a pretty big deal for me. Although I haven't been setting up as many monthly pages as I have previously, because I did a bit of consolidation, I just have larger kind of trackers and logs at the front of my journal, I was a little bit worried that I was gonna feel not as excited to get in and use my journal, but this actually wasn't the case. I've really enjoyed getting in, using things, populating my layouts. I think that filming the week of planning with me video at the start of the month probably did help with that, kind of kickstarted my journal use, but it's been fun making little weekly dashboards, putting my daily logs in, and also just adding little bits of decoration here and there using those stickers. I'm hoping for a similar level of use in August, but I'm also aware that I am going away for a week, and I do typically find that when I go away, my journal use gets a little bit weird, not only in the period where I'm away, because obviously I'm not at home, so the tasks that I'd typically be doing aren't really happening, but it also gets a little bit strange both before and after. Before, because I'm really busy trying to get all of my work done before I go away, and anytime I get really busy, I do neglect my journal, or at least I tend to. And then once I get back, I also feel really busy, so I tend not to use my journal as well. This is something that I am actively trying to combat though, and I'm hoping that the good practices that I've been practicing in July are gonna help me out for having a good August. In terms of the layout we're setting up here though, that is that monthly log. I'm again going with a calendar style layout because it's the style that works best for me, where each of those calendar boxes are 3 centimeters across by 4 centimeters down. That 4 centimeters includes a header bar where I'll write in the number for each of the days of the month. And you might be wondering, this calendar looks a little small for a month that supposedly has 31 days, and that's because technically it's not a monthly, it's a cyclic overview. I've been doing my planning in cycles rather than in months, so 4-week spans of time rather than the calendar schedule that we all typically use. This has been working well for me this year though. It gives me a better appreciation of the kind of passing of time, because if I only have 4 weeks, then each week is a quarter of the cycle. It means that I know that once 2 weeks are over, I'm halfway through the cycle. So I only have half as much time left to work on my goals and get things done. It has taken a bit of getting used to, and obviously some of the layouts are a little bit different compared to what you'd usually set up if you were using months, but I've been finding that it's working well for me so far. I know that quite a few people said that they were interested to try out cyclic planning when I first shared that I was going to be doing it. So if that was you, how have you been finding it? Are you still doing cyclic planning, or did you revert back to monthlies? Are you going with a kind of hybrid system? I think the thing that I like about it the most is that every month, quote quote, gets the same amount of time. So it just makes it a little bit easier for me to plan for that amount of time, knowing that it has the same number of days and the same weekly structure as the one prior. I have the same number of Sundays and Mondays and Tuesdays. In terms of actually setting up this layout though, I did find the decorative elements a little bit tricky, mainly because I wasn't too sure what I wanted to put in each of the available spaces. I primarily stuck to the corners and then that kind of panel down the right hand side. And I know this is very much related to one of the reasons why I said I wasn't going to do a coffee theme, and that's because I don't really drink coffee, like at all. I like coffee ice cream, that's delicious, but actually drinking coffee, not so much for me. In terms of the tape roll from the washi tape shop, that one had a lot of coffee quotes that I think are very much tailored towards coffee drinkers, like the idea of, but first, coffee, and coffee is my love language. Those quotes don't really fit the way that I treat coffee, so I didn't really want to include those in the setup, which meant that I was relying more on the other elements. In particular, I wanted to make use of the coffee shop ones because I thought they were really cute, but they didn't really fit on this monthly log. Instead, I mainly used the ones with the coffee beans and the leaves of the coffee plant because I liked the color palette on those, and I also liked the contrast of them compared to the other decorative elements I was putting in. I did have to remind myself at a few points, like, you do not have to fill every single piece of white space with decoration. That is usually my tendency when it comes to decorating. I don't really like white space that much, but I tried to lean into it just a little bit more this month compared to what I would previously do with this style of theme. In terms of the color palette, I didn't want to just rely on brown tones, because I feel like that's kind of the default when you're thinking about coffee. Most coffee drinks are brown. So I tried to steal some of the colors that were in the PET elements, in particular that kind of green-blue tone, which I've used on the calendar here to put in the header bars for each of those day numbers. When picking out the papers to go with the tape, I also tried to make sure I was picking tones that fit nicely with the colors that were already in the tape, so not going too cool tone with those paper colors. And similarly with the grid washi tape, which I picked a kind of peachy orangey tone, one that felt like it matched nicely with that green color that I was already using. I think the palette does end up looking a little bit eclectic, but I still think that they match together nicely enough that I'm happy with how they turned out. One of the things that I've been struggling with recently is kind of just taking care of myself. I've been finding myself working later than I would ideally like to be, and also a lot of those kind of daily self-care, executive function kind of tasks are falling by the wayside. I'm just finding it hard to remember to do them. So for my August setup, I decided that I wanted to have some layouts in here that were specifically dedicated to getting back on top of those self-care routines. One of those is going to be, funnily enough, the self-care routines page we're setting up here. And then on the right-hand side of this spread, I'm going to be setting up a self-care bingo. That one's kind of just like a gamified version of self-care, giving myself a little grid of tasks that I want to do to take care of myself. But in terms of the routines page I'm setting up here, this one is set up like a habit tracker, but I've kind of shied away from calling these things habit trackers now because they're not really habits. For something to be a habit, it's like habitualized. You don't really have to think to do it. It's very much an on autopilot kind of task, and the majority of these aren't for me. So calling it a routines tracker just feels a little bit more appropriate. The general way it works though is that we have the numbers for each of the days of the cycle going down the left-hand side of the page, along with the initials for the weekdays that they fall on, and then the columns that follow this represent the different routines that I'm trying to build, or the different elements that I'm trying to build into my routine. Because I had a little bit of extra space on the page, I also wanted to put in a place to put down totals for each of the weeks in the cycle. So how many times was I actually able to successfully complete each of those routines? This is something that I've been doing on my current weekly tracking that I've been doing, which aren't specifically routines related to self-care, but it's kind of nice to see those totals and see which ones in particular you're finding easier to accomplish or get done versus the ones that you're still struggling with in terms of remembering to do them. Because for each of my routines, I'm just putting in a little icon to represent them, I also wanted to set up a key for myself, because although I will remember what each of those symbols mean as I'm using it throughout the month, when I come back to look at this page in later months, years, whenever, having a key just helps me actually figure out what the information here means. By writing it down on the key, it also means I can't fudge the rules. For instance, the little sun means getting out of bed by a particular time. And I have found that previously I've started the month or cycle thinking it's going to be like, I don't know, 7:30 in the morning, and then after a week I kind of extend that out to 8 in the morning. If I write it down, then it's a little bit more concrete. Although monthly tracking in terms of habits or routines can sometimes be a little bit hit and miss for me, I'm feeling oddly optimistic about this one. We'll definitely see how it goes when it comes to doing my September plan with me, so if you do want to see how much of it I managed to get filled in, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss when we do that flip through. In terms of the timing for the setup that we're doing here, although the filming took about 3 hours 15 minutes, when it came to just considering the parts where I was actually working in the journal, that was closer to 2 hours. That's 2 hours across all of the layouts, not just the one we're working on here though. All of that extra time was very much me just sitting there thinking about what I wanted to do. I didn't really go into today's setup with a plan in terms of the decoration, but more so just the layout of the page in general. So how many spaces did I want for my trackers? How large of a grid did I want for the monthly log? I do certainly find that if I go in with a bit more of a plan as to how I want to tackle the decoration, the time taken is less. So even the 2 hours that I spent actually working on the setup probably wouldn't have been as long if I had gone in with more of a plan. I know 2 hours spent journaling to some people feels like quite a lot of time. I don't mind spending the time working on my journal though. This is a fun task for me. I enjoy the creativity, it's a time to kind of unwind and chill, and so I do consider it to be a self-care task, but not necessarily one that I'm going to put on my self-care bingo. As far as the bingo board is concerned, I've tried to put on things that aren't so typical, won't necessarily happen without a little bit of an extra push from me. And in terms of the structure of this layout, along with the typical style of title that we've got, this one's really just set up as a grid. I opted to do a 3x3 grid rather than a 4x4 or anything tighter, mainly because I didn't want to have to think of too many tasks, and also I know that this one is only going to be for a 28-day period, so doing much more than 9 larger self-care tasks probably isn't realistic. While I don't necessarily mind having too many things on a list to do in a given span of time, I figured that for this one I would rather just keep it to the top 9 things that I think I can do to take better care of myself, and just make it so that I'm more so focusing on those rather than having a very large list of things that I could do. Before going in and planning out this layout, I actually wrote down a list of the things that I was thinking could go on this bingo board, mainly so I could pick the right size. I figured if I do end up thinking of 16 different things that I could do, I might as well have a 4x4 grid. And although I've gone with a square, you don't technically have to. In a typical bingo board, you'd normally have it so that the length of both the vertical and horizontal sides are the same, so same number of spaces, mainly so that if you get your first vertical or diagonal or horizontal, you're gonna get the same number of things filled in, and thus you can set a reward for each of those. I'm not setting rewards for my bingo board. I did think about it, but I don't think it's going to be super necessary. And I also find that my default when it comes to rewarding myself is normally food, and I'm trying to get away from that because usually the reward food is not necessarily the most nutritious. I don't really have ways to reward myself for doing things on my goals list and stuff like that. I know that some people like to use stationery supplies as rewards, but for me, given the fact that this is my job, I don't really see new stationery as a reward, but more so business supplies. So no rewards for this one, but I am looking forward to doing the tasks that I'm populating the bingo board with. When coming up with my list, I tried to have a mix of different types of self-care tasks. So things related to being with friends and social time, things related to taking care of myself in terms of actually writing out my goals lists and working on those, things related to both physical self-care and mental self-care, just to add some variety to my self-care and make sure that I'm kind of approaching it in a holistic way. You'll note as I go through and fill these in, there are a couple of instances where I do make some mistakes in terms of my spacing. I had to fix those up just using some white sticker labels, and this could have been avoided by penciling in first, but I just didn't feel like it. To write in each of my bingo board options, I used a Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen, mainly because it's waterproof, so if I go over the top of this with a Tombow marker to fill in that I actually completed the task, then hopefully it shouldn't smudge or smear. Even though it is waterfast, I'll still be quite careful when I go over the top of it. I don't want my little bingo board to get all smudged and kind of nasty looking, especially because I think it turned out pretty cute. One of the things that I've decided to do more of in my journal though, especially now that I've kind of reduced the number of monthly layouts I have, is set up dedicated project pages for each month. At this stage, I'm only doing one per month, so when it came to July's setup, that was a summer creative retreat page. Whereas for August, I'm doing an office organization page. This one is effectively a project where I'm trying to reorganize my office, so declutter a bunch of areas, rearrange the furniture, just make it feel more inviting and cozy. But in terms of the summer creative retreat, this is something that's coming up at the start of August, so technically speaking, I could have included a layout for that as well. But because it's happening so early into the month, I just figured I'd set it up in July, because that's when the majority of my preparation was happening. If you're not sure what the summer creative retreat is, it's a free series of online workshops hosted by a bunch of very creative and talented people, and I have the pleasure of getting to host one of those workshops this year. It's going to be a lot of fun. It is 100% free, so if you are looking for a way to be a little bit more creative, get outside of your comfort zone in terms of your creativity, learn some new skills from people who are very talented, then check out the first link in the description box below to find out more information about how to sign up. I'm really excited to take on some of the creative classes myself, along with hosting my workshop. And really, it just feels like a fun and low-risk way to try out some styles of creativity that you haven't really dabbled in before. In terms of the office organization project though, you can see I have my decluttering list on the left-hand side, and then on the right I have sections for things that I might need to buy and things that I want to do in terms of tasks. I still need to finish brainstorming my task list. I do have, I think, the majority of things that will have to happen in the project, but I just want to make sure I have a full list before I put it down into the journal, because I kind of want to sequence it in terms of the order that I need to get things done in. I am very much looking forward to the office organization project. It's something that I've been kind of toying with for the past month or two, so it'll actually be good to get that done in the month ahead. On the right hand side of this spread though, that's where I'm going to be setting up for the first week in the cycle. I don't know what style of layout I want to do for that one yet, so I'm not setting it up here, but I am looking forward to planning that out soon because this new cycle is approaching quickly. Having a flip through of the layouts that we've set up, I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out, even though I did say I was never going to do a coffee theme. I know that the PET tape from the washi tape shop made it a lot easier and more approachable for me, and I also love the grid washi tape and how that kind of adds to the color palette. If you were looking for more August inspiration though, then the playlist we have on screen has all of my previous August setups, including things like a fun back to school theme, an August setup that's a lot more minimalist, and a bunch of other ideas, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.